Chapter 36. Pong and Samkit hurried for the mud house, using the rising sun to guide them east. Pong kept sneaking looks at his friend, who wore a deep scowl. "I know you're mad at me." Samkit snorted and scowled deeper. "Why would I be mad at you?" "Because I let Noxivapan out of that stable." Samkit coughed and rolled his eyes. "If she runs back to her daddy and you wind up in Banglad prison, then I'll be mad at you." If that happened, Pong would be mad enough at himself for both of them. But something inside him told him that it wasn't a risk. If Nock had wanted to turn him in, she'd had plenty of chances to do it. He didn't know why or how, but something about her had changed. He still didn't understand what she'd done to get locked up. He'd asked her several times during their escape, but she had barely spoken a word to him. Whatever had happened to her had sealed her shut, like an oyster at low tide. "It was the right thing to do," he said to Samkit. Yeah, it's like I always said, you just can't." Samkit coughed again, this time so hard they had to stop walking. "Are you okay?" asked Pong. "Am I going too fast?" Samkit shook his head, trying to catch his breath between coughs. "The air. It just seems like I can't get enough." The air did seem chalky, as if it was full of dust. A breeze blew over them, filling Pong's nostrils with a scent he hadn't smelled since he left Tanaburi. Burning wood. In the east, where Pong had thought the sun was rising, a black column of smoke rose above the rooftops. That was not the sunrise. It was a fire. The people along the canals had noticed it too. Some pointed, horrified, while others hurried indoors, which at least made it easier to get through the streets. Pong tucked one arm around Samkit, who was coughing continuously now, and pulled him down the walkway. Pong kept hoping that they would turn away from the pillowy clouds of smoke, but their path to the mud house was taking them straight for it. Around the next corner, they were nearly knocked down by a group of people running in the opposite direction. Samkit grabbed the arm of one of the women running past. "Auntie Mims," he gasped. "What's happening?" The woman lowered her rag she held over her face. "Samkit, my goodness, what are you doing? You've got to get away." "Please," said Samkit, coughing out the words. "Tell me, what happened?" She looked over her shoulder fearfully. "The mud house is on fire." She looked over her shoulder fearfully. "Everyone is fleeing for their lives. We've got to get away and hide ourselves before the police come." Auntie Mims took Samkit by the wrist. "Come with us. We have to find a safe house, but I don't know where to go." She looked around, frantic and confused. "I was supposed to have more people with me, but I lost track of them." Samkit pulled back from her, holding his hand over his face. "But what about Ampai?" "She's back there," said Auntie Mims, nodding in the direction of the mud house. "She's helping get everyone out. She told us all to hide." "I have to go find her," said Samkit. He doubled over, gasping for air. Pong put his hands on Samkit's shoulders. He had to get his friend out of the smoke. "You go with Auntie Mims," he told Samkit. "You know everyone at the mud house, and you can make sure they all get to a safe hiding place. I'll go find Ampai." Samkit shook his head, coughing violently. "Go on. They need someone to help them," said Pong, shaking him gently. "We'll meet up with you at the safe house." Finally, Samkit relented. The old woman gave him her rag, and they disappeared into the crowd. Pong took the hem of his shirt and covered his face, pushing against the flow of people streaming away from the mud house. He arrived to find the alley in chaos. While some people ran past him in a panic, others herded closer. The sight of orange flames flicking out of the third-story windows stopped Pong in his tracks. He felt hypnotized. Billows of smoke poured out, rising and rising like a black tower building itself into the sky. The sight had drawn a crowd of onlookers. They kept their distance, forming a half ring around the entrance to Mark's restaurant. Pong pushed his way past them and ran to the front door. "Ampai," he called. He got halfway across the dining room when someone grabbed onto the back of his collar and yanked him to a stop. It was Mark. His glasses were streaked with grease, and he held a wet rag over his nose. "What are you doing?" he shouted. "Don't be a fool. You can't go in there." "But I have to find—" Pong couldn't get the words out before his throat closed up. The black smoke hadn't found its way down to the lower floors yet, but the air tasted gritty and poisonous. It burned Pong's nose and mouth when he breathed. As Mark dragged him back to the door, he heard a horrifying sound coming from the floors above, the sudden crack of splitting wood. Mark pulled him out the doorway into the alley. Pong gulped down the semi-clean air. "Where is Ampai?" he gasped. "Still inside," said Mark. "Someone has to get her out." "She'll come," Mark nodded confidently. "There are still people in there. Once they're out, she'll come." As he spoke, a cluster of people staggered out of the building. Their faces were shiny and streaked with black. Pong looked past them into the restaurant. A flash of olive green darted back into the kitchen. "Ampai," he called. "She said she's checking the building," coughed out a woman who escaped, "to look one last time." "Someone give me a hand," called a teenager. He held the arm of an elderly man who stumbled at the doorway. Pong took the old man's other arm and helped guide him away from the mud house. Together, he and the teenager gently set him onto the street. "Hang on, grandfather," said Pong as the teenager ran off to find help. "We're going to get you to a safe place." The old man clutched Pong's arm weakly. "I couldn't stand up. My legs wouldn't work," he wheezed. "I was ready to die, but someone picked me up and carried me down the stairs. I thought it must be a giant, they were so strong." His eyes watered, and he smiled faintly. "It was Ampai. Can you imagine? A little woman like that, carrying me like a baby?" "What happened?" asked Pong. "How did the fire start?" "I don't know. We were sleeping," the man said hoarsely. He gazed up in horror at the flames coming out of the mud house. "It's happening all over again. I never thought I would see fire again. Never." The teenager came back with two men who helped the old man to his feet and carried him out of the alley. Pong turned back to the mud house. The roof was now completely swallowed by the clouds of black smoke. The flames roared higher, leaping from one window to the next. The snap of wood and crash of breaking glass grew louder. As Pong watched the building burn, he thought of the Great Fire. He couldn't imagine what it must have been like to see every building on the east side engulfed in flames like these. He wanted to run away, but he couldn't go until he saw Ampai. If she was doing one last sweep to check for stragglers, she should come out at any moment. He didn't take his eyes from the door to Mark's restaurant. "Finally!" called a woman in the crowd. "Oh, thank goodness!" shouted another, as the rest of the crowd cheered. Pong craned his neck, looking for the olive green jacket, but the crowd was cheering something else. A horn blasted from the canal behind the mud house, announcing the arrival of two stocky Fire Control Authority boats. Armed with water cannons and massive hoses, they shot thick streams of canal water up into the third-story windows. The flames danced defiantly, and at first it seemed that the hoses were no match for them, but slowly the black smoke gave way to gray steam. The fire retreated from the windows. For a moment, the fire control boats caused even more chaos. The wind shifted, and the alley filled with clouds of gritty steam from the doused fires. People ran in all directions, afraid that the police would be the next to arrive on the scene. Through the fog, Pong caught sight of what he'd been waiting for, that flash of dusty green, Ampai's jacket. With a wave of relief, he stumbled forward with his arms over his face, searching for the restaurant entrance. Finally, he spotted Mark kneeling on the ground outside the front door. "Mark, are you okay?" he said, trying to pull the man to his feet. Mark looked up at Pong, tears streaming from his eyes. "What? What is it?" cried Pong. He looked down and saw the green fabric at Mark's feet. Mark reached down and gently brushed Ampai's hair off her face. Pong braced himself for the worst, but she wasn't burned. Her cheeks were sooty, but otherwise, she just looked asleep. "Ampai!" Mark shouted, shaking her arm. "Let's get her out of here! Mark, we have to take her to a doctor!" "No good," sobbed Mark, shaking his head. "No good. She's gone. It must have been all the smoke. When I got to her, she was already gone." "What?" gasped Pong. "No, she can't be." He reached down and took her hand. It was still warm, but limp in his fingers. "Oh, Ampai," he whispered. 2 officers from the Fire Control Authority stomped toward them. "Sir, is there anyone else inside the building?" one asked Mark. Mark looked up at him, dazed. He shook his head. "No, she got them all out. Every person. She was the last one out." Pong folded his other hand around Ampai's fingers. Her sleeve fell back, revealing her bare wrist. The red bracelet that Father Chem had given her so many years ago, the one that matched Pong's own, was gone. He shut his eyes and remembered her smiling at him and telling him with a wink what her blessing from the old monk had been. "May your courage never falter." "He was right," whispered Pong. "It never did."